All right, ready to dive deep. Today, it's all about high output management by Andrew Grove. This book, man, it's a classic, a must read in the business world. And today, we're going to really get to the heart of it, the good stuff you can actually put to work.
You know, it's interesting. What strikes me about Grove's work is how practical it is. He was a giant at Intel, right? And his whole approach is like, how do we take these ideas from production, like from factories, and apply them to managing teams, boosting individual performance, all that jazz?
Totally. It's like he takes these complex ideas and turns them into something anyone can use no matter what field they're in.
Yeah, exactly. And he makes it fun, too. Like, who would have thought a breakfast factory could teach us so much about management?
Right. That's how he introduces the idea of a bottleneck, or as he calls it, the limiting step. You know, that one thing that holds everything up, like in a breakfast factory, it might be boiling the egg. Got to wait for that.
Ugh, the bottleneck. It's everywhere if you start to look. And what I find so powerful about Grove's approach is it's not just about identifying the bottleneck. It's about what you do with that knowledge. Like, you might be listening and thinking, okay, bottleneck, got it. But how does this help me with my work, with my life?
For sure, yeah. How do we actually use this?
Well, Grove lays out this awesome framework. He says, ask yourself, what's the one thing that's slowing me down on this project or in this area of my life? Is it lack of resources? Is it waiting on someone else? Is it, maybe a bit of procrastination on my part? Once you figure out that bottleneck, you can start to address it strategically.
That is so smart, so simple, but so powerful. And what I love is he doesn't just talk about it in theory. He gives real-world examples, college recruiting, software development, even the criminal justice system. He finds bottlenecks everywhere.
Because the principle is universal, right? It's all about understanding the flow of work, the flow of whatever process you're dealing with, and then figuring out how to optimize it to get the best results. And sometimes, the best way to improve a process is actually to build in some slack, some breathing room into certain stages.
Okay, wait. Slack equals efficiency. I'm not sure I'm following that.
Think of it like a highway. If every lane is completely packed, any little hiccup, any fender bender, it creates this massive traffic jam. But if you have a few lanes that are a bit less congested, traffic can keep moving even if there's a blockage somewhere. So it's about finding that sweet spot between a smooth, continuous flow and that little bit of flexibility to deal with the unexpected stuff.
I'm starting to get it. So it's not just about going faster. It's about being smart about how we work, how we structure things.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another big idea from Grove, the output equation. It's so simple, but so powerful.
Yeah, I remember this one. The output of a manager is the output of the organizational units under his supervision or influence. Basically, you're only as good as your team.
Right, but it's more than that. It's about this idea of managerial leverage. Your impact as a manager, it's not just about the tasks you complete yourself, but how you multiply the output of everyone around you.
Multiply. That's a great word for it. Okay, so I'm picturing like a lever, right? How do we actually use that leverage to get better results from our team?
Well, Grove actually studied his own time logs, super detailed to figure out what activities had the biggest impact. And he found that things that might seem small, like setting really clear guidelines for a project or giving someone timely feedback, those things had this ripple effect. They positively impacted the output of his entire team.
Wow, that's amazing. So it's not just about what I do, but how what I do affects everyone else on the team.
Precisely. And on the flip side, things like micromanaging or being indecisive, those can have a really negative impact on everyone's output.
Yeah, you can definitely feel that when a manager is holding everyone back. So every decision we make, every action we take, it all has these consequences. We got to make them positive ones, right?
Absolutely. And it makes you think, doesn't it? What are you spending most of your time on? Are those activities actually helping your team be more productive? Or are they, maybe even unintentionally, hindering their progress?
It's a good question to ask ourselves. Now, let's talk about teams. Grove had some really insightful observations about how teams work and what motivates people to perform at their best, like how Intel developed this hybrid organization structure.
Yeah, he describes it as this blend of mission-oriented teams and functional teams.
So it's like you have people who are experts in their specific areas, like marketing or engineering, and then you also have teams that are focused on achieving specific goals, like launching a new product.
Yeah.
How do those two types of teams work together effectively?
Well, he uses that breakfast factory analogy again. Imagine you have your dedicated teams for eggs, toast, and coffee. That's your functional side. But then you also have these cross-functional teams focused on serving different customer needs. Like
Yeah.
you might have the quick breakfast team or the vegetarian breakfast team. And those teams pull from all the different functional areas to get things done.
I see. So it's like having specialists who can also work together seamlessly on different projects. And it's not just about the structure, right? Grove also delves into motivation. He talks about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is this pyramid of human needs, starting with basic survival needs like food and shelter, and going all the way up to things like self-actualization, achieving your full potential.
Right. And what he does so brilliantly is connect this psychological framework to the workplace. He explains how managers can create an environment where people feel valued, respected, and like they have opportunities to grow. And that's what leads to better performance ultimately.
So it's not just about paying a good salary. It's about creating a culture where people feel like they belong, like they're contributing to something meaningful.
Exactly. And he takes it even further, comparing work to a competitive sport.
That one threw me for a loop when I first read it. How can work be like a competitive sport? We're not all trying to win medals here.
Right. But think about the mindset of an athlete. They're driven. They're constantly pushing their limits. They're striving for their personal best. Grove suggests that if you can cultivate that same spirit in the workplace, you can unlock a level of performance that traditional methods just can't achieve.
So we're not talking about cutthroat competition. It's about that shared drive to be excellent, to achieve something truly remarkable together.
Precisely. And that leads us perfectly into the next big concept, task-relevant maturity. This is all about how to manage people effectively based on their individual skills and experience level.
Okay, task-relevant maturity. Break that down for me. What does that mean in practice?
Well, it starts with the understanding that a one-size-fits-all management approach just doesn't work. Some people are brand new to a task, they need more guidance, more structure. Others have been doing it for years, they need more autonomy, more space to operate.
So, if someone is just starting out, you got to be more hands-on, like a coach teaching the fundamentals.
Yeah,
But as they gain experience, you can step back and give them more freedom, right?
exactly. It's about adapting your management style to meet the individual's needs. If someone has low task-relevant maturity in a particular area, they need clear instructions, close supervision, frequent check-ins. But as their maturity grows, you shift to a more communicative and supportive style, focusing on their development and growth.
So it's all about meeting people where they are and helping them get to the next level.
Precisely. And that goes hand in hand with clear communication and constant feedback, really understanding each person's strengths and weaknesses.
This is all starting to make so much sense. Identifying bottlenecks, maximizing our leverage as managers, understanding motivation, adapting our management style. It's all about building a system that creates amazing results, a system that's greater than the sum of its parts.
You got it. That's high output management in a nutshell.
All right, welcome back to our deep dive into Andrew Grove's high output management. Last time, we were really getting into the nitty-gritty of bottlenecks, those pesky things that slow us down, and how managers can use their leverage, their influence, to get the best out of their teams.
Yeah. We also talked about motivation, like how to create a work environment where people feel valued and challenged, and that idea of task-relevant maturity, how different people need different kinds of guidance depending on their skill level.
Exactly. And now we're going to shift gears a bit and talk about decision-making. This is where Grove's engineering background really comes into play. He approaches decisions almost like you would approach a scientific experiment. Very systematic. Interesting. So we're not just talking about gut feeling here. There's a process we can follow to make better decisions.
Absolutely. And it all starts with understanding what he calls the environmental demand. It's about really getting clear on the problem you're trying to solve, the opportunity you're trying to seize, the why behind the decision.
So before we even start brainstorming solutions, we need to define the problem clearly.
Got it.
What's next?
Then we need to figure out where we stand right now. What resources do we have? What limitations are we working with? What are the constraints? It's about gathering all the information we need before we start jumping into solutions.
So preparation is key. Do your homework before you make the decision.
Right. And once you've got a handle on the why and the where we are now, the next step is to set a clear objective. What do we want to achieve with this decision? What does success look like?
I'm sensing a theme here. Clarity, clarity, clarity. Clearly define the problem, clearly define the current situation, clearly define the desired outcome.
You got it. The more specific you can be with your objective, the easier it will be to evaluate different options and choose the best path forward. Now, once you've done all that prep work, it's time to start brainstorming solutions. And this is where Grove really emphasizes the importance of open communication and getting input from a diverse group of people.
So you're saying create a space where everyone feels comfortable sharing their ideas, even if they disagree with the boss.
Exactly. He calls this the free discussion phase. And to make it truly free, he says, you need to separate positional power from the decision-making process, at least during this brainstorming phase.
This is not about who has the biggest title, it's about the best ideas rising to the top. Love that.
Right. He also warns against something he calls peer group syndrome, where people hold back their true opinions because they're afraid to rock the boat or they don't want to disagree with the group.
Ah, the good old groupthink trap.
Exactly. That can lead to bad decisions because you're not getting the full picture. You're not hearing all the perspectives. So it's important to encourage dissenting opinions, even if they make us a little uncomfortable.
That's so true. Okay, so let's say we brainstormed a bunch of potential solutions. How do we actually make the decision?
Well, Grove gives us this super helpful framework. He calls it the 6 questions. And these questions, they force you to think through every aspect of the decision.
6 questions. Okay, I'm ready. Hit me.
Question number 1, what decision needs to be made? 2, when does it have to be made? 3, who will decide? 4, who needs to be consulted before the decision is made? 5, who has the power to approve or veto the decision? And 6, who needs to be informed once the decision has been made?
Wow, that's pretty comprehensive. It covers all the bases, right? Stakeholders, timing, process.
Right. It ensures that everyone is on the same page from the beginning. And in addition to those 6 questions, Grove also talks about the importance of timing. He uses the term time offsets to describe that gap between when a decision is made and when it actually takes effect.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Sometimes you have to make a decision now, even though the impact won't be felt for weeks, months, even years down the road.
Exactly. And the longer those time offsets are, the more important it is to think through all the potential consequences, all the ripple effects, especially for managers whose decisions impact so many other people.
It's a lot of responsibility. But it sounds like if you follow Grove's framework, you can really improve your decision-making, make those tough calls with more confidence.
Absolutely. Now, we've talked about bottlenecks, managerial leverage, motivation, task-relevant maturity, and decision-making. But there's another essential element of high-output management that we haven't discussed yet: meetings.
Ugh, meetings. The necessary
Yes,
evil,
but,
right? I feel like I spend half my life in meetings.
Well, Grove has some interesting thoughts on meetings, too. And as you might expect, he provides a very structured, systematic approach. He starts by distinguishing between 2 main types of meetings: process-oriented and mission-oriented.
Okay, break those down for me. What's the difference?
Process-oriented meetings are your regularly scheduled check-ins. You know, the weekly team meeting, the monthly project update, that kind of thing. They're focused on information sharing, knowledge transfer, and routine problem solving. Think of them as the regular maintenance that keeps the machine running smoothly.
So it's about staying aligned, making sure everyone is on the same page.
Right. And Grove is all about efficiency. So he suggests things like pre-reading materials, sticking to a strict agenda to make sure those meetings are productive.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely been in meetings that felt like a total waste of time.
Yeah.
Everyone's talking, but nothing's getting accomplished.
That's what we want to avoid. Now, mission-oriented meetings are different. They're called as needed to address a specific problem, to make a decision, to achieve a particular goal. They're more strategic, more focused.
So if you need to brainstorm a new marketing campaign or decide on a major investment, that would be a mission-oriented meeting, right?
Exactly. And for these types of meetings, Grove emphasizes the importance of clear objectives, well-defined agendas, and having a designated leader, a chairman, who's responsible for keeping things on track. He even suggests that you estimate the dollar cost of the meeting based on everyone's hourly rate to really highlight the importance of being efficient with everyone's time.
That's a great idea. It really puts things in perspective when you see how much money you're spending on a meeting.
It does. Now, speaking of efficiency, let's talk about something called dual reporting. This is a really interesting concept that addresses a common challenge in organizations, especially as they grow.
Dual reporting. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, it's about finding that balance between specialization and collaboration. Grove talks about how Intel, as it grew, evolved into this thing he calls a hybrid organization. They have these functional groups like engineering, finance, marketing, where people were grouped by their expertise. But they also had mission-oriented teams focused on specific products or markets.
So it's like having the best of both worlds. You've got your specialists in their respective departments, but then you also have these cross-functional teams that can pull together the right people to get specific things done.
Exactly. And this creates a situation where people might have two bosses, in a sense. They report to their functional manager, but they also report to their mission-oriented team leader.
Wait, two bosses. Doesn't that sound like a recipe for conflict? Who do you listen to when they disagree?
It could be, but Grove argues that when done right, dual reporting is essential for aligning individual expertise with the company's overall goals. It's about making sure that people have both the specialized support they need to develop their skills and the clear direction they need to contribute to the company's success.
So it's about having a foot in both worlds. Your functional area gives you depth of expertise, while your mission-oriented team gives you purpose and direction.
Precisely. And it requires a high level of trust and communication between the two managers to make sure they're both working together to support the individual's growth and performance. Grove even came up with this visual. He calls it the two-plane organization, where you imagine your functional role and your mission-oriented role as existing on separate but interconnected planes.
I like that visual. So it's not about choosing one or the other, it's about navigating both effectively.
Exactly. Now, in the context of dual reporting and these hybrid organizations, Grove also talks about understanding different modes of control.
Modes of control. Okay, what does that even mean?
It's about the different ways that organizations make sure people are working effectively and in alignment with the company's goals. He identifies four main modes: free market, contractual obligations, cultural values, and chaos.
Chaos. Doesn't sound good.
Well, chaos is what happens when there's no clear direction, no shared understanding. People are running around like chickens with their heads cut off. It's the least effective mode of control, for sure.
Makes sense. So what about the other three? Free market, contractual obligations, and cultural values. How do those work?
Well, the free market mode works best when you have highly motivated individuals, and the work is very clear-cut and measurable. It's like everyone knows what they need to do, they're driven to do it well, and they're rewarded accordingly.
So if you have a team of rock stars who are passionate about their work, this mode of control might be perfect.
Right. But as the work becomes more complex, more ambiguous, or more reliant on teamwork, you need other modes of control to keep things on track. That's where contractual obligations come in. This is all about having clear agreements, clear expectations to govern behavior and ensure accountability, like detailed project plans that everyone signs off on, or contracts with vendors that outline exactly what's expected.
So it's about setting clear boundaries and making sure everyone knows what they're responsible for.
Exactly. And then you have cultural values. This is so important in high output organizations where you want to foster innovation, collaboration, and a shared sense of purpose. It's about creating a culture where people are intrinsically motivated to do their best work, not just because of external rewards or punishments, but because they believe in the company's mission.
So it's about building a culture that attracts and retains top talent, a culture where people feel connected to something bigger than themselves.
You got it. And Grove's point is that effective managers need to understand all these different modes of control and know when to apply which one depending on the situation and the people involved. It's about finding that sweet spot between structure and autonomy, between control and empowerment.
I love that. It's all about balance, right?
Yeah.
Too much control stifles creativity, but too much freedom can lead to chaos.
Exactly. So we've covered a lot of ground here. Decision-making, meetings, modes of control, it's all starting to come together. But there's one more piece of the puzzle that we need to talk about, and that's performance reviews. How do those fit into this whole high output management philosophy?
Yeah, performance reviews. They can be a bit of a minefield, right? How do you give feedback that's honest and helpful without demotivating people? What's Grove's take on that?
Well, remember, Grove is all about clarity and directness. He believes that performance reviews should be an opportunity to have open, honest conversations about performance, both the good and the bad. No sugarcoating, no avoiding the tough stuff.
So straight talk, no beating around the bush. I like it.
Right. And he emphasizes that performance reviews shouldn't be seen as a punishment or a judgment. They're about providing feedback, recognizing achievements, and helping people identify areas where they can improve. He sees them as an ongoing process, not just a once-a-year event.
So weaving feedback into the flow of work rather than making it this big, scary thing that happens once a year,
Exactly. And he says the feedback should always be tied directly to the individual's work and goals. It should be clear how their performance is impacting the team and the organization.
So it's not just about saying good job or you need to improve. It's about being specific, giving concrete examples, and showing how their work fits into the bigger picture.
Precisely. He even lays out a framework for conducting effective performance reviews, with steps like gathering data, preparing thoroughly, focusing on both strengths and weaknesses, providing specific examples to illustrate your points, and delivering the feedback in a constructive and supportive manner.
Sounds like a lot of prep work, but it's worth it to make sure the feedback is actually helpful.
Absolutely. And Grove reminds managers that it's not about proving who's right or wrong or stroking your ego. It's about helping the individual understand their performance and identify areas for growth.
So it should be a collaborative process, not a one-way lecture.
Exactly. And just as importantly, he stresses the need to really listen during performance reviews. It's not just about delivering your message, it's about making sure the other person is hearing and understanding what you're saying. He even suggests paying attention to their body language, their tone of voice to make sure the feedback is landing the way you intended.
So it's a two-way street. You're giving feedback, but you're also listening and making sure the other person feels heard and understood.
Right. And finally, he emphasizes the importance of following up after the performance review. It's not enough to just deliver the feedback and then move on. Managers need to make sure there's a plan in place for the individual to address any areas for improvement. They need to provide ongoing support and guidance.
So it's about making it a continuous process of improvement, not just a one-time check-in.
Exactly. Now, before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, where we'll talk about Grove's insights on compensation, I'm curious, how does this view of performance reviews as these ongoing collaborative conversations resonate with your own experiences?
I think we've all been on both sides of performance reviews that felt more like a formality than a genuine opportunity for growth. But when they're done well, when there's open communication and a shared commitment to improvement, they can be incredibly valuable, both for the individual and for the team as a whole.
I couldn't agree more.
Welcome back to the show. I feel like we've been on quite a journey with high output management. We've covered so much ground already. Streamlining work, being more effective managers, building strong teams. Those sometimes awkward performance reviews, we've really dug deep.
We have. And now we're going to tackle a topic that always gets people's attention: compensation.
The money talk. It's important, but it can be tricky to navigate.
Absolutely. And as with everything else, Grove brings a clear, insightful perspective to this too. He sees compensation as this crucial tool for attracting and keeping great people, for motivating them and driving performance.
It's not just about handing out paychecks. There's a lot more to it than that.
You got it. He breaks it down into two main types of compensation: base salary and performance bonuses. Base salary is your fixed amount, usually determined by things like experience, your skills, what the market's paying for that role. Then you have performance bonuses, the variable part, directly tied to how well you do or how well the team does.
Okay, so base salary is like the foundation, the security, and the bonus is the extra reward for going above and beyond.
That's a good way to think about it. And Grove believes both are important, but he really emphasizes the power of those performance bonuses to motivate people to drive those great results.
Makes sense. But those bonuses, they can't just be random, right? They need to be tied to something specific, something measurable.
Right. They need to be substantial enough to actually matter to people, and they need to be directly linked to those outcomes that really move the needle for the company.
So if the company's goal is to increase sales by 15%, the bonus structure should reflect that, right?
Exactly. And it has to be transparent. People need to understand exactly how their performance is being evaluated, how that connects to their bonus.
Transparency, that's huge. Now, what about base salary? How do we figure out what's fair, what's competitive?
Grove talks about two main ways to administer base salaries. One is experience-based. The other is merit-based. In an experience-based system, you basically get paid more just for being there longer, for putting in the time.
I've seen that before, especially in more traditional companies. You climb the ladder based on seniority.
Right. But Grove points out a big problem with that. It sends the message that performance doesn't really matter. Just show up, Put in your time, you'll get your raise.
Not exactly inspiring, is it?
Not really. That's why he prefers a merit-based system. You get raises based on what you contribute, on your achievements. That encourages people to strive for excellence, to always be improving.
I like that, a meritocracy. The best people rise to the top.
Right. But Grove also acknowledges that a purely merit-based system can be tricky in practice. So he suggests a hybrid approach where both experience and performance are considered. That way, you're recognizing the value of experience while still rewarding those who are going above and beyond.
So it's all about balance again, right? Finding that sweet spot. Okay, we've talked about the mechanics of compensation, but there's also that psychological aspect. How do you make sure that compensation is actually motivating?
That's where the idea of task-relevant feedback comes in. Rewards should be directly linked to the specific actions and outcomes you want to encourage.
So instead of just saying good job, you're saying you did a fantastic job closing that deal. It brought in X amount of revenue, and that directly contributes to our goal of Y.
Like that.
Exactly. And he reminds us to avoid what he calls the potential trap. Don't reward people just for their potential, or for how charismatic they are, or for how much they talk in meetings. Reward them for actual results.
So it's not just about appearances, it's about the substance, the actual value they're bringing to the table.
You got it. And Grove acknowledges that designing a good compensation system isn't easy. There's a lot to consider. The market, what other companies are paying, internal equity, making sure everyone feels treated fairly, and of course the company's financial health, making sure it's all sustainable. A lot of moving pieces. But ultimately it comes down to this. How do we create a system that's fair, that motivates people, and that helps the company succeed?
Exactly. Now, before we wrap up our deep dive, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier, Grove's analogy of work as a competitive sport.
That one stuck with me. It's such a powerful image. But it's also a bit unexpected, right? To think of work as a sport. We're not all athletes here.
Right, but think about those qualities we admire in athletes. That drive, that dedication, that resilience, that constant striving for improvement. Grove says those same qualities can make all the difference in the workplace.
So it's about setting ambitious goals, pushing ourselves and our teams to be their best. Not in a cutthroat way, but in a way that elevates everyone.
Absolutely. And he suggests that managers can learn a lot from coaches. Great coaches know how to inspire their team, how to guide them to achieve those remarkable things.
I love that analogy. So as we wrap up this deep dive into high output management, it's not just about the tools and techniques. It's about a mindset, a way of approaching work with clarity, purpose, and a focus on achieving those amazing results.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's about taking those principles of production, those things that make factories work, and applying them to all aspects of our work. From those individual tasks we do every day, to the way teams work together, to how the whole organization is structured.
And creating that environment where people feel challenged, supported, motivated to do their best work.
Exactly. Grove's insights, they're timeless. They're as relevant today as they were back then, maybe even more so, with how fast the business world is changing.
I think that's a great place to leave it. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive and that you got some valuable insights you can use in your own work and in your own life.
Remember, high output management, it's not about working harder, it's about working smarter. Building that system that amplifies your impact and helps your team achieve those incredible things.
And hey, maybe along the way, you'll even discover that competitive spirit, that drive to push yourself and your team further than you ever thought possible.
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep striving to be your best.